morning. This is 4046 and today I'm going to talk about how to fix the elephant in the room, also known as Doctor Who. Now, it has been destroyed. It has been utterly decimated by the likes of Russell T Davies and his conclave and complete and utter poor storytelling and pushing the message which needs to stop. That doesn't go into good storytelling. Now, many will argue Doctor Who has always had a political message of some description. For example, the Green Death, talking about environmental issues. I was there in 1989 at the age of 8 when the show was cancelled. They didn't say it was cancelled, but it was. It was cancelled for a total of 15 long years, and eventually it came back in the guise of Christopher Eccleston, who, in my honest opinion, was a very good Doctor and didn't have enough time to shine due to Russell T Davies. Now, how do you fix a show that has continued on gender politics and sexualising the Doctor? Not everyone will agree with me on this video, and I fully respect that, but I do think that this would be the way in which to fix it. It needs to rest for a few years, and at this point perhaps up to 5 years. It's now been put out to tender, which officially means it's been cancelled, and I think on this particular thing you need to get a showrunner that was good at storytelling and not use the likes of Bad Wolf. Bad Wolf is purposely there already to take up that mantle and may even apply for the tender. You need a good showrunner, and at this moment in time I once would have said J. Michael Straczynski. However, J. Michael Straczynski is American, and the general prognosis is they want somebody that's British to do the show. Now, that's fine, no ifs or buts. JMS would have brought in some interesting elements, and he's fully capable of producing a good story. The downside with J. Michael Straczynski's latest works, including the animated Babylon 5 film, is love, and love is not the message of Doctor Who. Now, love is fine, love is a good framing device, but that's not the Doctor. The Doctor is an alien, and he is not somebody that should be sexualised like the last two have been. Now, as a way to fix it, I would, and not everyone would agree, I would pretend that the last, well, not pretend, but say the last 2 years occurred in a different timeline. In fact, I would go as far to say, even with that I would say that this occurred in the Doctor's mind whilst he was being put on trial for something else, as a alien technology which made him live a possibility of X amount of lives whilst still remaining as a pivotal 12th Doctor. Now, this would not involve any regeneration, because regeneration has been overused insanely spy generation isn't a thing. It never has been, never will be, and it's just ridiculously lazy storytelling because they've done this a number of times. I would bring back an actor. I'm not sure how young or old this male would be, because it would need to go back to a male doctor, but truly, properly alien and asexual. Now, story arcs, unfortunately, in modern television and series have been used a lot. I think to start off with, there'd be no story arc. The episodes could be connected, as in chronologically, but not forming a greater narrative. The new series would have to hit with a bang, and doing things, for example, episodes like Dalek is definitely the way to go. It doesn't have to be a Dalek, it could be any returning monsters. Would definitely be an integral part to remind the viewer of its DNA. The Cybermen would become more body horror than that of the previous very extremely robotic versions of the Cybermen. As much as I like the designs, they are too robotic, and they need to return to the roots of not necessarily Mondas, but if you've ever read the David Banks book, Cyber Telosians or Cyber Faction. Cyber Faction and Cyber Telesians look like the moon-based Cybermen, and I think with a modern twist they could accomplish that well. As stories like The Invasion prove, the Cybermen can be used in a very interesting way, and it would come across as more scheming than those of, for example, Revenge and Earthshock. I have watched most of the classic series, and there are elements of it that are not so good, and elements of it that could be reused. I think the horror perspective, gothic horror, could be used, not for a whole season, but there could be stories with gothic horror, such as the things like Brain of Morbius, for example. Now, the elephant in the room is the Time Lords. Now, the Time Lords would exist and be out the time lock, but you would only occasionally see them, like you used to when you first saw them in the Terror of the Autons, where they advised the Doctor the Master was afoot, and returning the Master to a Roger Delgado aesthetic would be good. Now, you can't replace Delgado because he was the definitive Master, but if you had an actor that could portray him in the best possible light and make him as scheming as he used to be, instead of trying to be like a Genesis for Cybermen, would be the right way to go. I think the Daleks need a redesign. I think their bronze coloured casings have been around like a piece of furniture. Yes, in the old series they went through several iterations, and I think if it's to be more like a Dalek paradigm, then perhaps the Daleks from the first 4 seasons would be more interesting to revisit with no Davros. I love Davros, he's a great character. They broke Davros using DEI politics, and that should not be in the show. Other other shows like Star Trek and Star Wars have suffered irrefutable damage because of this. And in going forward, putting Doctor Who on hiatus for now and bringing it back at a later date without a regeneration for a start, with somebody that you don't know anything about. So returning the Doctor to this enigmatic figure. Now, they went on the right way with Sylvester McCoy and perhaps bring back some of that mystery, but also the Doctor approaching each situation with some wonder that his first 5 incarnations had. 6 unfortunately didn't have enough time to shine, but at that time the show was suffering badly, and unfortunately it got put on hiatus in 1985 and returned in 86 with Trial of the Time Lord. Now, that aside, that Doctor could have shone very well. I think some of the storytelling was at fault, but they weren't trying to push a message. And also doing a musical song called Who Cares, involving Colin Baker, was not necessarily the best idea at the time. It returned for 3 seasons, and then in 1989 was unceremoniously and quietly dropped by the BBC controller Michael Grade. Now, it's an institution. It's been around for 60 odd years in one form or another. I wouldn't necessarily go down the route that some have suggested, using a lot of Big Finish stuff, because Big Finish is not accessible to everyone, and it has a high cost attributed to it, and it has done a lot of things, and some of that could be taken. For example, the Sword of Orion could be taken and turned into a mini-series, but extensively this is about the Doctor. I think to begin with he wouldn't have any companions. He would be by himself, because he'd been by himself for some time after the case proving his innocence, and he would potentially, as the series progressed, remember things from that time in captivity, if you like, or in imprisonment. He's no longer a fugitive. A lot of civilizations are very much aware of him, but sometimes it comes across as a mythological figure, because some of these things would have happened a long time in the past. It doesn't need to be in the 21st century, because there's too much that's been in the 21st century. Earth doesn't have to be involved in so many adventures. It needs to go back to being somewhere else in the spiral arm of the Milky Way, because it's predominantly based in the Milky Way. However, it would be interesting, for example, if they ended up in Andromeda, because this machine, the TARDIS, is an incredible, almost magical device. I think the TARDIS needs to take a rest for a while, and I think fixing its chameleon circuit briefly, like they did in Attack of the Cybermen, would be interesting, to say the least. Now, it doesn't lose the police box permanently, but for certain stories, I think if it used its chameleon circuit, which works a little bit, be the best way to go. Now, bringing back people like the Master doesn't have to be immediate. That could be towards like a season finale or something like that. And I'd even go as far as saying, yes, the Master should be male, but Missy was pretty good as a Master. And also John Sims was very good as a Master. But the ridiculous guy that they brought in to do the Spy Master was totally terrible. I checked out as soon as they started doing things like the Rosa Parks thing. Now, yes, that was an important moment in civil rights history, but it's not the place for Doctor Who to be. So I think in events that have history, they don't need the individual. Like in the City of Death with Leonardo da Vinci, you didn't see him, but you saw his workshop, and that as a more evocative image than using, for example, Van Gogh, which was a good story, which highlighted things like mental health. And I think mental health is something that isn't focused on enough. Now, it would probably retain its 45-minute run, and it would be available in many streaming services, and for quick turnaround release on physical media if necessary. And I think that it has to come out punching, because if it doesn't, then there's no point. It's not a reboot. A reboot is something that is fundamentally a broken thing, but it just returns the Doctor to a character of mystery, and often they humanise the Doctor way too much, and he lost some of his mystique, if you like. So I think that needs to get an incredible actor to do it. The problem is, at this moment in time, no actor worth their grain in salt wants to do it, and sees it as a poisoned chalice. So I think they'd have to cast somebody possibly relatively unknown, but good potential for character growth. Companions would come later, but companions wouldn't necessarily be a focus. I think they focused on several companions way too much, and I think the companions have to be seen more as what is on Earth is going on, instead of just accepting what it is. It is quite a difficult one. I think also certain Time Lords like Omega, for example, could return, but more as a Time Lord, a renegade Time Lord than a demon, because that was just silly. And people like the Rani could return, but none of this bi-generation nonsense, because that just doesn't enrich the viewing experience. And to bring something back for the long-time fans of the show. We're not looking for a new audience, we're looking for the ability to draw back in the audience we lost, and that is the toughest hill to climb. Again, no political messaging in this, so no left or right leaning in this, and again, no sexualisation of any character, because it doesn't need to be done. It's not good storytelling. It's you need some good story writers to come in on this, and you need a continuity person, and I'm sure there's some really good ones out there. And we're not talking about Ian Levine, because I think he's checked out for some time. On top of that, perhaps with missing episodes and stuff, harking back to some of the things the Doctor did but then proved that wasn't the right way to go, will be quite interesting as well. Please like, please subscribe. This is my first sort of reaction video because Doctor Who has been an integral part of my science fiction identity since I was 7, and I only caught remember catching the first story of Time in the Rani. I don't remember seeing it previous to that, and also not putting it in contention with something like Coronation Street because that was a massive screw up. But they're making it more on an event television. I know the US likes saying that, but I think to sustain its future and to build a better Doctor, I think that is the way to go. There would have to be, I don't think preludes or precursors was necessarily a good idea. However, maybe even the first episode could be Doctor Who, but you only see the Doctor at the very end of the episode. But I digress. Please like and subscribe in the comments. I do enjoy making these videos. This is the first video I've made such as this. There is so many levels on how to fix this show. The wilderness years of the 14 to 15 years were interesting, but it needs something a bit more concrete and a timeline in which to possibly push this narrative forward and completely forget about 14, 15 and 16 because they rubbish the narrative. They not through bad acting, but the writing just wasn't there, and doesn't need to be a big spectacle. For example, things like the Edge of Destruction, not the best example of Doctor Who, but something along those lines could work very well in today's settings with a really well written script and a good set of actors. Anyway, this is 1446, a lot longer video than I normally make, but this is something I care about, and wherever you are, whenever you are today, whenever you are, have a great day, and I'm glad to say the heat wave is well and truly over. Till next time, this is 1446 out.